Welcome to the Big Digital Thinkers. I'm your host, Mike McClintock, with my co-host today, Jen O'Day. So our second guest today on the show is Douglas Drouillard. He's from Shrine Development, which is a mobile and blockchain consulting firm. How's it going, Doug?
Very good, sir.
Yeah, thanks for coming down.
Absolutely.
How was the drive?
The 5-minute drive.
Does it take? It took. Well, you must have hit the light.
Exactly. No, I'm downtown Ferndale, and it's awesome. I love it down there.
Good, sweet. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what's been going on lately? Give us the big catch up here. What's happening over at Shrine? What are you working on?
Absolutely. So I guess before I get into that, I guess we spoke for a couple years ago, right? I was working for Governor Snyder. I was the CTO for the Rick for Michigan, which is Governor Snyder's re-election campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, I was big into mobile at that time, and then since then I've been doing mobile development and also got into the blockchain space.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Mike, I believe that there are two types of companies these days. There are those that are using technology and those that are about to go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've looked at, I had a startup. I left that, and I've recently started, freelancing, building a development shop. And I looked at what are the two spaces that sort of are most interesting to me. One is mobile, and then the second one was blockchain. But really, what I'm trying to do is basically help people use technology, but at the same time stay focused on revenue. So there are a lot of development shops out there that will build you whatever you ask for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the saying? Give a consultant enough money and he'll tell you anything you want.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So what I try to do is instead of just leading sort of endless R&D projects, I try to keep it focused on revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of my unique angle, is that I have a background in computer science, went to the University of Michigan, but then I've also worked as like an account executive and in some leadership roles. So I can drive projects basically from the technical angle and from the business side.
Mm-hmm.
And this is especially relevant for blockchain, because the blockchain space is hot right now, right? Everyone's seeing dollar signs, and they're
or Bitcoin signs.
Yeah, seeing Bitcoin signs. There's a new coin every week.
Yep.
Not an exaggeration. There are people raising upwards of $200 million in under 3 hours, and what's insane is that it doesn't seem to be stopping, but at the same time, that generally is when things stop.
Yeah.
And
especially when the SEC gets involved.
Yeah,
starts
absolutely.
writing papers.
Absolutely, yeah. When the SEC starts.
Let's take a second and back up a minute for our listeners.
Yes.
All 5 million of them out there, and people have heard of Bitcoin.
Yes.
Some people have heard of Ether.
Yes.
But let's talk a little about the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or Ether in particular, is just one application of blockchain.
Yeah.
Blockchain is a lot of stuff. It's a whole category of technology. It's a whole protocol that is really new, and there's just an explosion of things going on. We've heard of all these internet coin offerings like you were just referencing, but what's the blockchain?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to say the blockchain is the technology of a distributed database that can be updated sort of in a permissionless manner that is sort of open to everyone, whereas crypto is the soap opera / community that lives on top of the blockchain. So there are two reasons to use
soap opera. That's a good way to
put
it.
It really, crypto is soap opera for nerds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really is just so much it's just people making up drama. I mean, honestly, the amount of stuff, basically people are trying to pump prices, they're trying to affect prices, and they do that through relying on human emotion. And so, there are, like you said, the SEC really isn't involved, so it's the Wild West. You'll just see all sorts of stuff. I mean, it really is entertaining so my advice is for the casual person in crypto, it's just be very careful when you go in there, because those guys are sort of master manipulators.
Yeah.
They prey on emotion. They'll create all sorts of rumors. I mean, I've seen where
it's the ultimate in pump and dump.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've seen basically people with a back of a cocktail napkin description, which they call a blue. What do they call them? It's not
the white paper.
The white paper.
Yes,
but
the white
some
paper.
of them are calling them the blue paper now. So they basically have a 10-page concept of an idea that might be an idea that might turn into something.
Right.
And then you have to have a really super fancy website. It's got to
Yes.
have. It's got to
Oh,
look
yes.
like Tron Legacy, straight up, right? If it doesn't compete with Tron Legacy in visuals, it's
No.
not good enough.
Yep.
And then at that point, they sell a new token, a new coin, a new cryptocurrency based on their platform that they're building. Let's call it, underwear for woodchucks.
Yep.
So we need a coin for that.
Yep.
And then they're raising 50, 60, 70, $250 million worth of cryptocurrency, which, by the way, they can then convert into actual dollars.
Yes.
And now you've got this seed-funded $200 million underwear for woodchucks, and then they got to go out and build it. But it's like the equivalent of having a meeting with some venture capitalists over coffee and saying, hey, I got it. It's all going to be this. It's a platform for underwear for woodchucks. And then him writing you a $300 million check.
Yeah.
And you get to take $100 million of it and go on vacation for a couple of weeks and then come back and see if he can build something.
Absolutely.
Am I exaggerating?
No. I guess I should have
So
started.
how do we get into that? What the hell are we doing here?
Well, absolutely. So I guess I should have addressed blockchain first. Why would you use a blockchain, right? You hear about this new technology, so newer must be better. There's Bitcoin, and as you said, there are like all these different variations on Bitcoin, or as I call them, cousins of Bitcoin. Why use any of them to begin with? The reason I think is pretty straightforward. You are worried about censorship. So you are either worried about censorship from a government, or you're worried about collaborating with people who are then going to censor you.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first reason would be like, I want to do something illegal. Now, that doesn't mean immoral. That means illegal.
Mm-hmm.
So against a law.
Mm-hmm.
So, you want to transfer money across borders. Like you want to send money to Iran. That is illegal, right? You cannot do that. With cryptocurrency, sending money to Iran is the same as, sending money from, to your next door neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So then the second reason, which is where a lot of the enterprise cases are trying to focus on, is can we build a stronger network together if we're not worried about one of us becoming Google and then cutting everyone off, or becoming like if everyone tries to angle for a platform play, then people are hesitant to join because like if I join your platform, won't you just cut me off or change the terms? A great example is look what Twitter did back 4 or 5 years ago when they said, hey, come build on the Twitter API, and then one day they decided, hey, yep, you're done. We have these 4 quadrants. If you want to keep using us, send us a letter. We'll let you know. Which was sort of
if we read them.
If you read them right, which I think was sort of the end of Twitter.
Yeah.
But at least in my
it was
opinion,
for me.
Yeah, for the interesting stuff, I think most of the features that were interesting came from third-party apps, and they had all these people working for free for them, coming up with all these awesome ideas, and then they decided like, oh, we want to go pitch GM, so let's we need to be a professional now.
Right.
And I just think it sort of petered out. But back on track. So yeah, if you're worried about censorship, then a blockchain is an interesting application. The interesting part about the problem is the blockchain, because everyone has a copy of the data, that's what makes it censorship resistant. It also makes it horribly inefficient. I mean, blockchains are some of if you consider them like a computer, like Ethereum calls itself the world's computer, I mean, it's a pretty terribly expensive computer. I looked at a project that was it's like a time tracking application. You can punch in and out.
Okay.
Someone ran the calculations, the creator of the contract, I guess, which we can address smart contracts. But they said for 100 people to run this contract, which is as simple as just like punching in at the beginning of the day and out at the end of the day, it would cost $2,500 a month at $400 Ethereum, which isn't that far off.
Right, because you're paying, they call it the gas, but you're paying for the rest of the distributed computer. All these computers out there, when they call it mining, you're paying them a small little piece of it in order to validate those transactions. So that's why it's distributed, because you get a consensus amongst the rest of the computers, but then they have to go through, a proof of work, and that costs electricity.
Yes.
And all those computers running, then, you have to pay them a token to, compensate them to want to have those mining rigs, which are the computers that validate these transactions, and it costs a lot of money. I mean, I think, what is it now? Like, 2/3 of the world's electricity consumption is Bitcoin mining, or maybe that's too much.
I haven't heard that.
No, I don't know. It's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a lot of electricity.
It is a lot.
It's a lot, going on with that.
And at this point, the electricity is what secures the network. The proof of work, that is the security. They go hand in hand, at least for the current sustainable blockchain applications. There's proof of stake, which is a little bit different, but that really hasn't been proven out in any of the major systems. At least there are some that run, but of the major two, those are both proof of work. Ethereum is talking about moving to proof of stake, but
so your application that you were looking at was $2,500 a month just in gas.
yeah,
just in validation, just paying for the usage of that platform.
Yep,
That's
and
horribly
storage.
inefficient.
Yeah, and storage, which means like, why would you want everyone to have, so Stream Detroit, right? Why would you want everyone to have all your data anyways for an application like that? I mean, it sounds a bit contrived, but I mean, if a lot of these applications on the enterprise space, they, first question is like, people say, okay, I want to use a blockchain. Then they hear about it and they're like, okay, that's fine, but I just want to contribute my data. I don't want to pay for the externalities. I don't want to pay for like, someone else's data. I just want to use mine. And it's like, well, that's
kind of that defeats the purpose.
It defeats the purpose.
That's called the database.
Exactly. That's called the database, and it's much more efficient.
Right. You can have that this afternoon.
Exactly. I think AWS in some ways is 100,000 times. What is it? There's a Medium post on this that we can link to, but it's like
it'll be right down here.
100 it's like 100,000 times cheaper to run computations on AWS versus Ethereum, and it's like over 1 million times on the storage. I mean, it still costs $1,000 per megabyte to store things on Ethereum.
Right.
And it makes sense. I mean, you're storing it on so many different computers. But so when bringing this back, when would you need that? Well, if you need to basically trust a trustless system, and when would you need that? Well, when you're worried about censorship from basically a higher authority.
Right.
So I've done a lot of research on Bitcoin and spent 6 months thinking like, okay, this is going to apply to all these different realms, and then I'm very positive on the space, but for a lot of these applications, it just doesn't. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of, I think, the enterprise companies, like for Microsoft, they sort of use blockchain as sort of marketing. Right?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah.
So
use it on Azure. You can run.
Exactly. And then when you realize, oh my gosh, this application costs $8 million a month to run.
I guess we'll use SQL Server.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. Yeah. $8 million a month, or you can $100 a month for SQL Server, right? And so that definitely, I'd say that's unique to 2017, is that the marketing is just so hot on blockchain that it has uses there. The other bit that you touched on that makes blockchain unique is that these tokens that people create that you mentioned, it sounds extremely silly on its face, as far as like, okay, you give people all this money. Why would anyone give a project $50,000? That's so stupid. But the thing is, these tokens have liquidity, like immediate liquidity. And so really what they're doing is they're buying it for 50, and they'll put in 50 grand, but then the next day, basically, I think I could be wrong, but there's maybe like 99% of these ICOs, basically at some point within the first month, you could sell for above a 20% jump.
Oh yeah.
And some of them, people are making like 55x on these things.
People are just making pork belly futures all over the place.
Yeah. And there definitely is something that there's this concept of a crypto hedge fund.
Yeah.
If you look at the coins, so if you go to CoinMarketCap, there are over 1,000 different variations of these coins. I think there certainly is a business model where it's essentially what Dave McClure did with angel investing, which is this concept of spray and pray, which is you will look at these projects and invest in 10 of them. And if one of them hits, I mean, if you get a 55x return, the rest of them can go away.
It doesn't
and you
matter,
don't care,
yeah.
and you have immediate liquidity. But that presents another challenge, which is, well, if someone gets $200 million and it's immediately liquid, why would you work on a project? Because you basically hit your home run,
you
right?
better really like this project.
Yep. And so
that's hard. We can't do it.
Right. And so, I mean, that's interesting because the whole startup world is basically built on the 4-year vesting period with a 1-year cliff, and that's what keeps people along.
Right.
But if those people had immediate liquidity, would they stick around?
Kind of reminds me of Diaspora. You remember that
I
one?
remember it.
And I think that they raised, was it like 100,000 or $1 million or something like that? It wasn't. It was 4 guys.
Yep.
And it went to shit.
Right.
And it was just bad.
Yeah.
This is just adding a lot of extra zeros and commas into it.
Yep.
So, like, what happens to that money if it goes bad? The project goes bad. They just get to keep it.
They already got it.
Oh.
They already got it, and because you're essentially buying a greater fool. I mean, it really is it is a Ponzi for sure. I mean, Ponzi has a very negative connotation of absolutely right, but at the same time, like you're buying in and then you're selling it to the next person.
Mm-hmm.
You could make that argument for any company. You could say like, oh well, if you buy stock in Caterpillar, isn't that a Ponzi, right? Because you don't buy industrial equipment. You're
Mm-hmm.
counting on someone else to do it. But the thing is, these things haven't really proven out their utility yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why these
And you don't even get to keep the tulips.
What's that?
You don't even get to keep the tulips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't even get tulips to plant.
Right. I mean, it's like insane. What was it? How much was tulips back in the day in Holland?
Yeah.
The original one?
Yeah.
Billions of dollars worth of tulips?
I think that there is something here. I think it's more internet bubble than tulips, as far as I think there is like long-term value.
Mm-hmm.
If for no other reason, then there's just so much R&D money going into the space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you put in $3 billion into a space and 90% of it's garbage, you still have a fairly sizable
Right.
budget that went into something that was worthwhile.
Yeah.
But
It's kind of like a Cambrian soup now, though. You've got just a whole... I mean, some of these ideas are the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
And
Not
some of
only-
them are just... Even the white paper is like, geez, did anybody proofread this? And
Yeah.
yet, it's still like
Right.
millions of dollars rolling into these
and
things.
that's the Ponzi aspect, because those people that put in $1 million, you think, oh, they're stupid, but they went around and sold it for $2 million, right? And then
Right.
so like, hey, you just I doubled my
Right.
money in
Because all these,
in 6
weird
months.
weird coins are then convertible to Bitcoin or Ether,
Yep.
and then that's convertible to cash,
Yes, it is.
and it's basically a big giant pump and dump thing.
It is.
Hence, the SEC giving recommendation or guidance a
Right.
couple of weeks ago that said, hey, these things might be commodities, and you might need to register with the SEC
Yep.
to do these things. And so now,
It'll be interesting to see what they do on the regulation side, because
Mhm.
essentially you're not even buying, even if it was the greatest idea, right? Greatest idea ever. And the concept ended up working out. A lot of these things, you're not buying equity. You're not buying debt. You have no warrants or rights.
Mhm.
You're essentially buying a token,
hmm
which could have utility in the future.
Yep. It's a
But
commodity.
yeah, but there's nothing.
It's not a share, it's a commodity.
Yeah, I guess, but it's interesting because the utility value of those tokens really hasn't been proven out in the commercial world, at least from what I've seen. I would love for someone to say, hey, here's this application, it uses blockchain, and it generates substantial commercial value on the public side. I think on the banking side, I think JP Morgan and those guys, they have what they call the bank chains. Those might actually work, as far as like lowering fees on remittance and
That's
transferring
true.
value.
As a replacement for Western Union,
Yeah.
that does. But back to your original point of why would you want to use blockchain? I don't think Goldman Sachs and within the Federal Reserve System doing a cryptocurrency is going to work for somebody in Iran.
Yeah.
Because then your whole point that you're making is then you'll still have, know your customer. So to me, it's
Right.
like, banks with regular money, you got to know your customer.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of cryptocurrency is you don't know
Right.
who I am.
Yes.
And now if you're going to work inside of the regular financial world with it, and you got to know your customer, you've completely eliminated one of the primary use cases for cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think like mainly the only reason, because really opening a bank account or sending money or none of that stuff is difficult because the technology's not there. It's not because Visa is just a bunch of dummies or MasterCard's stupid and they can't develop, some sort of way to open up a credit card with no proof of identity.
Yeah.
They could do that whenever they wanted, right? And it'd be much faster because it's all centralized. They can control it. So yeah, the whole knowing your customer versus not knowing it, and then basically The value of crypto in that first use case of the government censorship is it's basically arbitrage on government regulations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you found sort of this play where,
Yep.
okay, I can send money and I don't have to know my customer. So then there's value there.
Yep.
And so as long as people disagree with government, then there is some value. So that's where I think it's a little bit different than tulips. Because there will always be people who disagree with the government who are trying to do things that the government says they should not do.
Especially in countries with totalitarians.
Right.
You know, I mean, you could make the case for the United States with the NSA, but
Right.
you know, if you're an Iranian,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things you can't do.
Yep.
Nothing against Iran.
Right. No, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how much of the market is driven by Americans who are thinking that foreigners in different countries, or people in like China or Venezuela are buying it versus just Americans basically committing a Ponzi upon themselves. Like, it's all these Chinese buyers who are doing it. And then like, oh yeah, maybe it's not. Like, so Bitcoin just forked. There are now two versions of Bitcoin. There's Bitcoin and there's Bitcoin Cash, which is very funny because for about, do you remember the DAO?
Mm-hmm.
So there was this incident where this is in the Ethereum community. There was
Distributed Autonomous Organization, DAO,
Yeah.
not the DAO as
yeah,
the DAO, but the DAO.
the DAO.
Like the DAO of poo.
So the DAO is definitely, I would say, the ultimate greater fools thing. It was this idea that everyone could throw their money together.
It was a shit show. Let's just call it.
Oh, it was, and the whole thing was. I mean, just from business model to team to like how it was supposed to work. I mean, it was just pure fantasy. But so the DAO got hacked. Basically, they published a contract, and again, this isn't centralized. So like the DAO set itself up as a contract. Basically, there was no like organization. It just lived on the blockchain. But they didn't build any sort of way to upgrade that contract, except by a 20% vote. Or sorry, you had to have a quorum of at least 20%, and you had to like vote on this. Getting 20% of people to vote on something that they were just throwing in money because they thought someone else would eventually want it turns out that it's very difficult. And so the DAO got hacked. I think it was basically 4 lines of code that were wrong. They actually had a pull request, which means like they had code available, ready to deploy that would have fixed the issue, but they just couldn't. They couldn't do it. It was like it's like a slow motion accident.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it, like it's happening, and there's all these people are writing stuff like this is bad, like we need to stop this thing, and then the people were like, oh, I don't know, like okay, fine, let's stop it, let's take a vote, let's upgrade the contract, and they couldn't get to 20%, and then someone who probably was closely related to the team there.
It's always an inside job.
Yeah, definitely. One of the golden rules of crypto is always an insider. I mean, it really is. Someone basically stole $50 million. At the time, it was $50 million, and that was at $10 Ethereum. So multiply that by 100, or sorry, by 10 now. Or no, was it 50?
I just got confused. Sorry, we started saying numbers.
It was at $10, and now it's at like $330.
Yeah.
So that $50 million. Became 30x that.
Mm-hmm.
So they ended up forking Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have Ethereum, and then you have Ethereum Classic. And that whole time, the Bitcoin community was just sort of like laughing, right? Saying, oh my gosh, look at it. It's all centralized. It forked.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just proof that centralization doesn't work. But then Bitcoin forks for the exact opposite reason, which is they can't agree on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to be sort of like more on the optimistic side, just in life in general.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the Ethereum community.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the Bitcoin maximalists, in particular, there's a guy named Chris DeRose, who I think he is probably the best expert on this subject because he's went through all the phases of being like very idealistic about it, and then sort of like rethinking like, okay, does this make sense? And then computing the costs of it, and then watching some of these exercises of people raising all this money and then nothing really coming of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite interesting. I mean, just as far as like the Bitcoin, who's sort of like these guys who are antagonistic versus the idealistic people on the Ethereum side. They're all basically trying to prove out how do we build the best blockchain. And they're taking different approaches, but at the same time they're having common issues, which is, they're splitting either because they want to undo wrongs because they feel moral, or they just don't want to work together.
Who is Satoshi Nakamoto?
I think it's Nick Sabos.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Or him in the combination of the PGP guy?
It could be. I don't think it's the Australian.
Okay.
Craig Wright. I don't. It doesn't quite.
You think it's multiple people or one?
It strikes me as one.
Mm-hmm.
As one person. I think that person had help early on.
Mm-hmm.
And you know there could have been like Hale Finney who passed away. Could have been like a core guy.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. It's
Yeah, it could have been him,
Finney.
but again, you know, he has that weird like. Remember that? For people who aren't familiar, like one of Hal Finney's like neighbors or something like that.
was
His name's
Satoshi Nakamoto,
right?
Yeah, like he just found a piece of mail and just
Right.
made it up, or he knew the guy or
Right.
something.
Yeah. So it could be. There's that weird story with Craig Wright, and then who's the guy who's down in Florida? He's basically a guy who's bound to a wheelchair. Dave something.
Uh-huh.
They thought the two of them created it, and that was Craig Wright's big thing. But
So there's an original white paper on the protocol for Bitcoin. It was authored by this guy named Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows who that is,
Right.
So there's people named, it's Satoshi Nakamoto, and they say, well, this is the guy, but it's probably a pseudonym.
right.
But ironically, a lot of the original cyberpunks, I guess you could
Mm-hmm.
call them, or cypherpunks, depending,
right.
who could suspiciously be capable of actually pulling off the Bitcoin protocol and writing this up, just happened to live, was it 4 blocks or 4 miles? It
Something,
was
yeah.
like stupid close to
Yeah.
a guy named Satoshi Nakamoto,
Right.
who,
Who was very
who was
funny.
just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't talk about
Right.
this anymore.
Yeah.
So he said, I can't talk about this anymore, and slammed the door. So they just assumed,
Yes.
well, it must be that he's guilty. He's the one. He made this,
Right.
but it was an error in translation. And I don't think this guy had anything to do with it whatsoever. But it is kind of funny that if you're going to make up a name, you find a guy that's 4 blocks from your house,
Your neighbor.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Right. Yeah, and that goes back to the crypto community just being full of drama.
Yeah.
They love it. So they get a story like that plays well on Twitter. Because
Mhm.
if you're wondering like where do you find
It's all just a big D&D game.
yeah, essentially with like what $150 billion on the line or something like that. But
Yeah, or
it-
300 million at a
Right.
time. Yeah.
So crypto, these coins are essentially they're bearer instruments as opposed to registered instruments. So if you own them, then you can seek value. Again, that's another Chris DeRose thing I stole from him.
Mhm.
We'll definitely link to that video. You'll see the best video on
Right here.
on smart contracts has like a Nintendo game soundtrack
Mhm.
and like a crazy
Perfect.
animation. I mean, but again, it's but that again, he's a Bitcoin maximalist, so it makes sense, right? He's
Mhm.
like very very sort of
A
snarky.
Bitcoin maximalist?
Yes, that means
Mhm.
so Bitcoin maximalist means use Bitcoin everywhere. Everything else is sort of
Yep.
garbage.
It was that they can use it at strip clubs in Vegas now. We found that out on our last episode that had nothing to do with Bitcoin.
Oh boy, I'll have to tune in for that one.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so then the question is, what I call the $100 billion question, because I think that's what these alternative altcoins, as they're called, what the market cap of them has become, is are there uses beyond just simple money changing or storing value? So
Mhm.
Bitcoin can do that. Yes, it has a 10-minute block time, but that sort of is what secures the network, meaning that they could reduce it. But the theory is if you make it too simple to publish another block, then you'll get very fast block times, which means you'll get a lot more splitting. And again, with a blockchain, if they split, there's a chance that if you're in a split that doesn't get included, you basically get wiped out.
Mhm.
And so if you look at some of the alternatives, like people are trying like blockchains without blockchains, again, to take advantage of the hype, you'll look at some of their implementations.
Isn't that called a database?
Yeah, exactly. No, decentralized
Mm.
database that isn't a blockchain. that
It's
uses-
cloud. It's all cloud.
It's all cloud.
Mm.
But if you look in the forums, even quickly, you'll see a bunch of people are like losing their money, losing their
Mhm.
value because they're like, I sent it and then it just went away. What happened?
Mhm.
It's like, well, yeah, it's because it split and converged and you weren't in the.
It's technology. What do you expect?
And so that's why I don't think you'll ever see like, okay, I want to go to Burger King. Let's pay with Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? It's not really that hard.
We're gonna bring this up in 5 years at a Burger King.
I know, and then you're gonna be an idiot.
Yeah.
That's fine.
What does this guy know?
Yeah. Sorry, I should rephrase that. edit that one out. I say, I don't think we'll use the current version of Bitcoin.
Grandma won't be using Bitcoin at Burger King.
Let me hedge. Yeah. But again, why? Because as a buyer, I mean, with crypto, you don't have any recourse for righting a wrong, right? So if you send to the wrong address, which,
Right.
this crazy long hexadecimal thing,
Right.
or, oh no, hopefully it's hexadecimal. Probably not. Shit. People are going to call me out on that. This big long address,
Yep.
and
It's good.
you're off by one digit, your money's gone. I mean,
Yep.
like, there's nothing
Thank
anyone can
you.
do. Who are you going to call, right? You call
Yeah.
call up
Yeah,
Satoshi-
that's the you-
call up Satoshi
that's the
Nakamoto,
downside.
right?
Right, exactly.
And since it's a bearer instrument, like
It's
if
Palo
someone
Alto.
steals your wallet,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? You have no recourse.
Yeah.
Your kid takes your USB drive,
Yeah,
throws
bearer
it.
instruments typically are going to be sophisticated investors
Right.
with sophisticated clearinghouse systems to unwind transactions. And here we have, people who have trouble operating a pop machine
Yes.
with cryptographic bearer instruments.
Yes.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Yeah, I mean, there's no fraud detection or prevention. I mean, once it's gone by definition. Because if you can pull it back, at that point you have a centralized system, in which case, just bring it all the way back. Why use a blockchain, right?
Having said all that, I'm all optimistic on blockchain.
Yeah, me too.
We called out all the goofy stuff here, but you
Yeah.
know, it's definitely in infancy right now.
It is,
But
absolutely.
It's
Yeah,
something.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if computing costs go down, right, so that it becomes cheap enough,
which they always do.
which they do. And then the other thing is, so on the actual governance side, so a lot of this work that's being done, a lot of these ICOs are basically becoming glorified R&D projects that are open source.
Right.
And so there is definitely the opportunity for enterprises to adopt the technology just simply because other people are building the basis of it. And then
Right.
by definition, it's open source and decentralized. So that means you could just copy it
Yes.
and use it. So I think there is a use case there as well.
For private blockchains in the enterprise.
Yeah, exactly. And so in my business, I have like 3 blockchain projects right now. One is essentially looking into how could you do an ICO in an SEC compliant manner. Basically, there are different platforms that do that. Just taking a look at them, trying to evaluate them. The second one is in the ticketing space. So like for events.
Event ticketing.
Event ticketing. There's an ICO called Eventus, but that one's like purely on the blockchain. And going back to my earlier statement about like $2,500 punch clocks,
Yeah.
I can't imagine keeping all of the,
Hybrid.
yeah. So seeing like can that work? And then the last one basically is in the insurance industry. There might be some uses there. But where inside the insurance industry it fits, that'll be interesting because some of the insurance industry's problems are not at all payment related. I mean, as far as like if you get in a car accident, that's you need an adjuster there. The payments is sort of secondary, at least in my experience of being in a couple of car accidents.
Yeah. So this is the smart contract for the adjuster.
Yeah, exactly. There are people who say like, oh yeah, well,
Which is great because getting the check part once it's all decided is trivial.
right.
It's getting it decided.
Yeah. So
You
I
know?
mean, what are you gonna do? You're gonna like take pictures and then upload them to the blockchain and like do a vote. I mean, this is what people do. There was someone who like carried out a project like this. It was for personal insurance, and then magically around 95% way through, he said, "Oh, something come up. I'll just let someone else take it over." Or as they say in the crypto community, "Oh, we'll let the community decide." That's basically like when you want to get out of it.
I'm done.
Yeah, you want to get out of it. You made your money, or you've proven you sort of hit the wall. You just say, "Oh, I'll just give it to the community."
I'm bored.
As if there's all these like sort of rock star people who want to come work on your project versus their own. Because I realize like
Yeah, because why would you do that?
why go work on something?
All I need somebody is to build it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was again on the insurance side. It just there's so many challenges. But again, if you can go raise $20 million on redoing car insurance, I guess
Yeah,
it's
hey,
like until
go for it.
yeah, exactly. Go for it because you have immediate liquidity. You can get out.
So if people want to tap into that brain of yours, how do they get a hold of you?
Sure. So www.shrinedev.com.
Shrine Dev.
Shrinedev.com.
It'll be right down here too.
Yep.
Right here.
That too.
Shrinedev.com.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I learned a lot.
Thanks.